The November fog of 1895 had settled over London like a living thing, transforming the familiar streets into a labyrinth of shadows and muffled sounds. Gas lamps struggled against the thick yellow murk, their feeble light creating pools of amber that seemed to float disconnected in the gloom. It was on such an evening that I found myself once again in the comfortable sitting room of 221B Baker Street, observing my friend Sherlock Holmes as he conducted one of his peculiar experiments with test tubes and chemical solutions. Holmes stood before his makeshift laboratory, his lean figure bent over a series of bubbling concoctions that filled the air with acrid smoke. The sharp scent of sulfur mingled with something sweeter, perhaps chloroform, creating an atmosphere that would have driven most visitors from the room. I had long since grown accustomed to such olfactory assaults, positioning myself strategically near the window where a slight draught offered some relief. "You observe, Watson," Holmes remarked without looking up from his work, "how the addition of silver nitrate creates this distinctive precipitation. Most would consider the reaction complete, but watch what occurs when we introduce this catalyst." He added several drops of a clear solution, and the cloudy mixture immediately became transparent once more. Before I could offer my usual polite interest in his chemical pursuits, the sharp ring of our doorbell cut through the evening's quiet. Holmes straightened instantly, his manner transforming from languid scientist to alert predator sensing prey. "Ah," he said, wiping his hands on a stained cloth, "unless I am very much mistaken, that is the sound of desperation arriving at our threshold. And judging by the urgency of the ring, 3 sharp bursts followed by a pause. Our visitor is both frightened and educated. A professional man, I would venture, unused to such emotional displays." The mysterious visitor, Mrs. Hudson, soon ushered in a gentleman who appeared to have aged considerably in recent days. Professor Edmund Blackwood was perhaps 50 years of age, tall and distinguished, but his usually immaculate appearance showed signs of profound distress. His frock coat was buttoned incorrectly, his cravat hung askew, and his iron-gray hair stood in wild disarray. "Mr. Holmes," he began, his cultured voice trembling slightly, "I come to you because Scotland Yard has dismissed my concerns as the imaginings of an overwrought mind. But I'm absolutely certain, that my colleague, Dr. Adrian Valmont, has met with foul play." Holmes gestured to the chair opposite his own, his grey eyes already cataloguing details about our visitor. "Professor Blackwood of the Royal Institute, unless I am mistaken. Your hands bear the telltale stains of botanical ink, and the distinctive odor of pressed flowers clings to your clothing. Please compose yourself and tell us everything from the beginning." The professor's eyes widened at this casual display of deduction. "How could you possibly but know I have heard of your methods? Yes, I am Edmund Blackwood, and Dr. Valmont was my research partner in a most sensitive botanical study. The nature of this study," Holmes inquired, settling into his chair with that characteristic pose of steepled fingers beneath his chin. "We have been investigating the cryptographic applications of botanical illustrations," Professor Blackwood explained, his hands gripping the chair arms. "Specifically, we were deciphering what we believed to be coded messages hidden within 18th century flower paintings. Dr. Valmont had made a breakthrough regarding a particular cipher concealed within Hyacinth illustrations, what he called the Hyacinth Cipher." Holmes leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. "And when did you last see Dr. Valmont?" 3 days ago, at his private laboratory in Montague Street. We had been working late into the evening on the cipher when Adrian became increasingly agitated. He claimed someone had been watching the building, that our research had attracted unwanted attention. I suggested he was overtired, but he insisted I take all our notes with me for safekeeping. The professor reached into his coat and withdrew a leather portfolio. The next morning, I received this message, purportedly from Adrian. He handed Holmes a folded paper. It claims he has been called away on urgent family business, but Mr. Holmes, Adrian has no living relatives. Furthermore, the handwriting, while similar to his, lacks his characteristic precision. Holmes examined the letter with his magnifying lens, holding it to the light and studying the paper quality. Interesting. The ink is standard, but observe the pressure variations in the script. This was written by someone attempting to disguise their natural hand. The tremor in certain letters suggests either advanced age or extreme nervousness. There is more, Professor Blackwood continued. Yesterday I visited his residence. The housekeeper, Mrs. Partridge, seemed frightened and claimed Dr. Valmont had left suddenly, taking only a small valise. But when I attempted to check his laboratory, which is accessed separately through the rear of the building, I found the door locked, and no response to my knocking. The scene of mystery. Holmes rose abruptly, reaching for his ulster and deerstalker. Professor, I shall require immediate access to Dr. Valmont's residence and laboratory. Time may be of crucial importance. I have a key, the professor admitted reluctantly. Adrian gave it to me years ago for emergencies, but I hesitated to use it without proper authority. My dear professor, Holmes interrupted, if your colleague is indeed in danger, every moment we waste may prove fatal. Watson, your service revolver, if you please. We shall visit Montague Street immediately. Within the hour, we found ourselves standing before number 47 Montague Street, a respectable Georgian townhouse, whose drawn blinds and darkened windows gave it an air of abandonment. The fog had thickened, muffling the sounds of the city and creating an atmosphere of otherworldly isolation. Professor Blackwood led us through a narrow alley to the rear of the building, where a separate entrance provided access to what had once been the building's carriage house, now converted into a private laboratory. The door was indeed locked, but Holmes made quick work of the mechanism with his collection of delicate instruments. The laboratory beyond was a testament to scientific precision. Shelves lined the walls, filled with botanical specimens, chemical apparatus, and rows of carefully labeled reference books. Gas jets provided illumination, revealing a space that was both workspace and study. At the far end of the room stood a large desk, and it was here that our attention was immediately drawn. Dr. Adrian Valmont sat in his chair, his back to us, appearing to be absorbed in his work. It was only when we approached that the terrible truth became apparent. The man was dead, his body positioned naturally, as if he had simply fallen asleep over his papers. But there was no mistaking the waxy pallor of his skin or the unnatural stillness of his form. Good heavens, Professor Blackwood gasped, stumbling backward. I immediately began my examination while Holmes surveyed the scene with his characteristic intensity. Death occurred approximately 6 to 8 hours ago, I reported. No obvious signs of violence, though I detect a faint, sweet odor about the lips that might suggest poison. Indeed, Holmes murmured, but his attention was focused on the desk before the deceased. But observe, Watson, what our departed colleague was working on at the time of his death. Upon the desk, arranged with obvious care, sat a small earthenware pot containing 3 hyacinth bulbs in bloom, 2 purple, 1 white. The The flowers had been positioned at specific angles, and thrust into the soil between them was a folded piece of paper bearing a series of letters and symbols, Hyacinth. But these letters were not arranged in a simple line. They formed a complex pattern with small marks and symbols scattered between them, and certain letters circled or underlined. The paper itself bore traces of damp soil, as if it had been handled with dirty fingers. "The Hyacinth Cipher," Professor Blackwood whispered. "But this arrangement, I've never seen anything like it." Holmes studied the arrangement intently, his sharp features illuminated by the gas jets. "Most instructive. The flowers are positioned deliberately. Note how they form specific angles relative to each other. The paper has been disturbed recently. Observe the fresh soil stains. And yet," he moved to examine the laboratory's single window, which was securely latched from the inside, then tested the door through which we had entered. "Professor, you said that this door was locked when you attempted entry yesterday." "Yes, and there is no other exit. The window is too small for a man to pass through, and as you can see, it's secured from within." Holmes nodded grimly. "Then we have here a most intriguing problem. Dr. Valmont appears to have died alone in a locked room. Yet this cipher arrangement suggests he was not working alone. Someone else handled these materials after his death. Someone who wished to leave us a message." He turned to face us, his eyes bright with the thrill of intellectual challenge. "Gentlemen, we are dealing with the mind that understands both botanical cryptography and the art of murder. The Hyacinth Cipher is not merely Dr. Valmont's research. It has become his epitaph. And I suspect that whoever arranged this elaborate tableau is far from finished with their deadly game." The fog pressed against the laboratory windows as Holmes began his methodical examination of the scene, and I could not shake the feeling that we were being watched by unseen eyes, that the mystery of the Hyacinth Cipher was only beginning to unfold its deadly petals. Holmes began his examination with that peculiar intensity I had witnessed countless times before, moving through the laboratory like a predator, reading invisible signs. His lean form bent over every surface, the gaslight casting angular shadows that seemed to dance with each methodical step. Professor Blackwood remained near the door, his hands clasped tightly behind his back, watching our investigation with barely concealed anxiety. "Watson, observe the carpet beneath our deceased colleague," Holmes murmured, producing his magnifying lens. "Note the indentations where the chair legs have pressed deeper on the left side." Dr. Valmont sat in this position for considerable time before his death, yet rigor mortis has not yet passed. The timeline troubles me greatly. I knelt beside the body, conducting a more thorough examination. The pupils remain dilated, unresponsive to light. There's a faint, sweet odor about the lips, and despite the general pallor, the cheeks retain an unnatural flush. These symptoms suggest a vascular poison, something that accelerated circulation while clouding consciousness. Excellent, Watson. A toxin that would render the victim helpless while maintaining the appearance of natural death. Holmes moved to examine the Persian rug more closely, his nose nearly touching the fibers. "But observe here, faint traces of reddish clay, distinct from common London mud, tracked from the door to the desk. Yet Dr. Valmont's shoes bear only ordinary street dirt. Someone else walked this path, stood behind our victim, then retreated." Professor Blackwood stepped forward nervously, but the door was locked from inside. "I found the key in Adrian's waistcoat pocket myself." Holmes straightened, his grey eyes bright with interest. "Indeed, yet this clay tells us otherwise. Someone gained entry, conducted their business, and departed, leaving us with an apparent impossibility." He moved to the hyacinth arrangement, studying it intently, without disturbing the carefully positioned blooms. Professor, in your cipher work, what significance did Dr. Valmont attach to the specific positioning of flowers? Color indicated alphabetical shifts, but positioning. Blackwood paused, studying the arrangement. The white bloom points directly toward the northern wall. Adrian never mentioned directional significance before. Holmes strode to the bookshelf, running his fingers along the leather spines. Someone has recently disturbed the flora of the Hebrides. The dust pattern is misaligned. He carefully tilted the volume forward, revealing a small hollow in the wood paneling behind. Empty. Whatever was concealed here has been removed. Then it was simple robbery, Blackwood suggested hopefully. Nothing about this is simple, Holmes replied, returning to the desk. He lifted Dr. Valmont's right hand, examining the fingernails with his lens. Blue wax beneath the thumbnail and traces of graphite. Our victim was writing something when he died. Something beyond what we see here. The ink stains on his fingers are fresh, yet the pen on the desk is dry. From his coat, Holmes withdrew a leather-bound journal he had retrieved from the shelves. Dr. Valmont's research diary, most illuminating. Notice how the handwriting becomes increasingly agitated in recent entries. The final notation, dated 3 days ago, reads, "The third eye sees what two cannot. HP knows. Meeting arranged. Must verify before revealing all to EB." HP? I inquired. An unknown correspondent who apparently possessed knowledge crucial to the cipher. Professor, your colleague mentioned verifying something before sharing his discoveries with you. What might that have been? Blackwood's face paled. Adrian claimed he had identified the location of the Medici correspondence, a collection of letters between Catherine de' Medici and their intelligence network. These documents allegedly contain information about hidden Medici treasures, secreted away during the French Wars of Religion. The hyacinth was Catherine's personal symbol. Now we approach a motive worthy of murder, Holmes observed. Hidden treasures have inspired countless crimes throughout history, but this elaborate staging suggests something beyond mere greed. He bent suddenly, his fingers darting beneath a chair. When he straightened, he held a withered hyacinth petal, its deep purple color darkened almost to black. This petal is at least a year old, pressed and dried. Someone carried it here deliberately. That's impossible, Blackwood protested. Our specimens are all fresh bulbs. I maintain careful records of all botanical materials. Holmes pocketed the petal carefully. Yet here it lies, a message from someone intimately familiar with your research. The question remains, how did our mysterious visitor enter and exit a locked room? He glanced toward the small window, securely latched from within. The laws of physics have not been suspended, gentlemen. Therefore, one of our assumptions must be incorrect. Before anyone could respond, a sharp knock echoed through the laboratory, causing us all to freeze. Holmes's eyes flashed with anticipation. It appears, he said quietly, that our investigation has attracted attention. Watson, your revolver, if you please. Whoever seeks entrance to a locked room containing a murdered man may prove most instructive to our inquiry. The sharp knock echoed through the laboratory again, more insistent this time, accompanied by a woman's anxious voice calling through the heavy wooden door. Dr. Valmont, sir, I know you're working late again, but you've had nothing to eat since yesterday. I've brought your evening meal. Holmes positioned himself beside the doorframe, one hand resting lightly on the door handle, while I kept my revolver at the ready. Professor Blackwood retreated toward the far corner, his face pale with renewed apprehension. With a swift gesture, Holmes opened the door to reveal a stout, motherly woman in her middle years, dressed in the black dress and white apron of a housekeeper. She carried a laden tray, her round face creased with worry lines that seemed to have deepened considerably in recent days. Mrs. Partridge, I presume, Holmes said gently, taking the tray from her trembling hands as her eyes swept past us to the motionless figure at the desk. The inevitable recognition dawned with horrifying clarity across her features. Oh, merciful heavens, she whispered, one hand flying to her throat. He's dead, isn't he? I knew something dreadful had happened. I felt it in my very bones. Despite her shock, she displayed the practical composure of one accustomed to household crises, sinking into a nearby chair rather than succumbing to hysterics. I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is Dr. Watson. Holmes introduced us with quiet authority. Professor Blackwood, you know. Please, compose yourself and tell us everything you have observed these past few days. Every detail may prove crucial. Mrs. Partridge pressed her apron to her eyes briefly, then straightened with visible effort. It began Thursday evening. 3 days passed. Dr. Valmont returned home near midnight in a terrible state, muttering about being followed, checking the locks twice, drawing all the curtains tight. I'd never seen him so agitated, not in all of my years of service. Did you observe anyone suspicious in the vicinity? I inquired, settling into my role as recorder of testimony. Not that evening, but Friday morning brought a most peculiar visitor, a foreign gentleman, swarthy complexion, wearing an expensive coat despite the warm weather. Most distinctive was his ring, a large green stone that caught the light, something fierce. He carried a package wrapped in oiled cloth and insisted on delivering it personally to Dr. Valmont. Holmes leaned forward with keen interest. This package? What became of it? The doctor had locked himself in the laboratory by then and wouldn't answer my knocking. The foreign gentleman grew quite agitated, pacing about and muttering in what sounded like French. Finally, he pressed the package into my hands, saying it was of utmost importance and that Dr. Valmont would understand its significance immediately. And did you deliver it? Holmes pressed. Mrs. Partridge nodded vigorously. That very afternoon, when I knocked, Dr. Valmont opened the door just wide enough to snatch the package, then bolted it again immediately. But here's the strangest part, gentlemen. Later that evening, I heard voices. 2 men conversing in the laboratory, though the doctor had sworn to see no one until his work was complete. Professor Blackwood started forward. 2 voices, but Adrian told me he would admit no visitors. Our research was far too sensitive. That's precisely what troubled me, Professor, Mrs. Partridge continued. The second voice was unfamiliar, cultured, but with a slight accent. They spoke for perhaps half an hour, sometimes quietly, sometimes with what sounded like heated disagreement. Then I heard the laboratory door open and close, and assumed the visitor had departed. Holmes examined the contents of the tray with sudden attention. You prepared this meal at Dr. Valmont's specific request. Another peculiarity, Mr. Holmes. This morning I found a note slipped under my door, written in the doctor's hand, requesting his usual evening meal be brought at precisely 7 o'clock. But something about the handwriting seemed wrong, shakier than usual, less confident in its strokes. Holmes extended his hand. The note, if you please. Mrs. Partridge produced a crumpled paper from her apron pocket. Holmes studied it carefully, then held it alongside the false letter Professor Blackwood had received earlier. The similarities were unmistakable, the same tremulous quality, the same careful attempt to mimic Dr. Valmont's characteristic penmanship. Observe, Watson, Holmes said, his voice tight with concentration. Our mysterious visitor is not merely a murderer, but a skilled forger. This note was designed to ensure the body's discovery at a predetermined time, establishing a timeline that serves the killer's purposes. He turned back to Mrs. Partridge. After the visitor departed Friday evening, did you notice anything unusual about the laboratory? The gaslight burned continuously through the night and all of Saturday. I knocked several times, but Dr. Valmont never responded. By yesterday, I was beside myself with worry, but the door remained locked fast. When Professor Blackwood arrived this afternoon, I was grateful someone else shared my concerns. Holmes began pacing the small space, his mind clearly racing through possibilities. This foreign gentleman with the distinctive ring. Did he give any name or indication of his business with Dr. Valmont? None whatsoever, but as he was leaving, I heard him mutter something about the third key and Catherine's secret. Meant nothing to me, but Dr. Valmont had been obsessed with some French queen's letters lately. Catherine de' Medici, Professor Blackwood supplied weekly, the focus of our cipher research. Holmes stopped pacing abruptly, his grey eyes bright with sudden understanding. Mrs. Partridge, think carefully. When you found this morning's note, was it actually slipped under your door or discovered elsewhere? The housekeeper's brow furrowed in concentration. Now that you mention it, sir, it was lying on the hall table near the servants' entrance. I assumed it had been pushed under the door during the night, but I cannot be entirely certain. Which suggests someone had access to the house between midnight and dawn, Holmes murmured. Yet all doors and windows were secured. Always, Mr. Holmes. Dr. Valmont was most particular about security, especially these recent weeks. He'd taken to checking every lock personally before retiring. Holmes returned to the Hyacinth arrangement, studying it with renewed intensity. The three blooms seemed to mock us with their silent testimony, their careful positioning suggesting meaning beyond mere decoration. The solution lies not in impossibility, but in misdirection, he said finally. We are being led to see what the murderer wishes us to see, while the truth remains hidden in plain sight. Mrs. Partridge, your testimony has been invaluable. Watson, I believe it is time we examined Dr. Valmont's private correspondence more thoroughly. The foreign gentleman's package may have contained more than our killer bargained for. Holmes requested that Mrs. Partridge remain available in the main house but speak to no one of Dr. Valmont's death until given permission. She departed reluctantly, casting one final sorrowful glance toward her deceased employer before her heavy footsteps receded down the passage. The laboratory fell into the peculiar silence that accompanies violent death, broken only by the steady hiss of the gas jets and the distant rumble of London traffic beyond the fog. The foreign gentleman remains our most tangible lead, I observed, holstering my revolver. Surely his description will suffice for Lestrade's men to trace him through the usual channels. A swarthy foreigner with expensive clothing could describe half the Levantine merchants in London, Holmes replied, already moving toward the large mahogany desk. No, Watson, we shall discover his identity through his actions rather than his appearance. Let us examine what our mysterious visitor accomplished during his fatal interview with Dr. Valmont. The desk's lock yielded quickly to Holmes's delicate instruments, revealing neatly organized correspondence and research notes. Among the papers, Holmes discovered a series of letters bearing Parisian postmarks, their formal scientific language betraying an underlying tension that suggested more than academic discourse. Most illuminating, Holmes murmured, holding one letter to the gaslight. Dr. Valmont was corresponding with one Monsieur Henri Delacroix of the Sorbonne. Observe this passage, Watson. The blue gentian thrives best in shadows where the hawk cannot see. Rather poetic phrasing for botanical research, wouldn't you agree? Professor Blackwood leaned closer, adjusting his spectacles. Delacroix, that name carries unfortunate associations in academic circles. Brilliant but controversial, rumored to have been dismissed from the Jardin des Plantes for unauthorized experiments with toxic alkaloids. Precisely the sort of expertise required for our present circumstances, Holmes noted. But observe the postmarks. These letters arrived weeks ago, yet Mrs. Partridge described her foreign visitor as appearing only recently. The timeline suggests either multiple correspondence or a carefully orchestrated deception. While Holmes continued his examination of the correspondence, I investigated the fireplace, where cold ashes suggested recent use despite the mild weather. Using the fire tongs, I carefully extracted a partially burned fragment of heavy paper, its edges charred, but portions still legible. "Holmes, examine this," I called. The fragment bore only scattered words. Third key contains midnight exchange, Catherine's cipher. Most significantly, one corner displayed an embossed crest, a stylized lily intertwined with a serpent. The Medici family crest, Professor Blackwood whispered, or rather, a variation used by Catherine de' Medici's intelligence network. Adrian discovered similar symbols in our research. Holmes pocketed the fragment and turned his attention to the tall cabinet behind the laboratory's curtained alcove. The keyhole showed fresh scratches, distinct from older wear patterns, suggesting recent forced entry. Inside, we discovered a collection of shallow drawers lined with dark velvet, each containing botanical illustrations of extraordinary delicacy and precision. "These are not mere decorative pieces," Holmes observed, examining a hyacinth painting with his magnifying lens. "Note how certain leaves appear unnaturally twisted, forming angles inconsistent with nature. Each deviation likely represents a deliberate cryptographic signal. The lowest drawer proved most revealing, empty save for a rectangular impression in the velvet where some object had rested for considerable time." Holmes knelt, studying the dust patterns with intense concentration. The missing item measured approximately 8 by 5 inches, quite thin. Most importantly, observe these faint traces of reddish clay along the drawer's edge. The same distinctive soil we found tracked from the door to the desk. Our visitor's path included this cabinet. Professor Blackwood studied the empty space with growing alarm. If Adrian had discovered a genuine Medici cipher document and hidden it here, its theft would represent an incalculable loss to historical scholarship. Or, Holmes replied grimly, it would provide someone with a treasure map worth killing for. He returned to the hyacinth arrangement, studying it with renewed intensity. But our murderer made one crucial error. Observe how these flowers are positioned. The white bloom points directly toward the cabinet we have just searched. Yet when I examined them earlier, it indicated the northern wall. Someone has rotated this pot since Dr. Valmont's death. With infinite care, Holmes lifted the earthenware pot from its saucer, heavier than expected for simple soil and bulbs. "Watson, that small trowel from the workbench, if you please." Working with surgical precision, Holmes excavated around the white hyacinth's shallow roots. 2 inches down, his trowel struck something hard, a small object wrapped in oiled cloth precisely matching Mrs. Partridge's description of the foreign gentleman's package. "Hidden within the cipher itself," Holmes murmured, unwrapping the package to reveal 3 ornate keys of obvious antiquity, each bearing tiny engraved symbols, a crown, a fleur-de-lis, and a hyacinth bloom. The three keys Professor Blackwood mentioned, not metaphorical cryptographic keys, but actual implements, probably designed to open Catherine de' Medici's personal strong boxes. Before anyone could respond, the sharp sound of official knocking echoed from the front entrance, followed by Inspector Lestrade's unmistakable voice demanding immediate admittance. Holmes pocketed the keys swiftly, his expression taking on that familiar blend of amusement and calculation that invariably preceded his most brilliant deductions. The game grows more complex by the moment, gentlemen. Let us see what Scotland Yard's finest makes of our locked room mystery. Inspector Lestrade entered the laboratory with characteristic briskness, his sharp features betraying both satisfaction and suspicion as he surveyed the scene. Behind him came Sergeant Hopkins and two constables, their heavy boots disturbing the careful atmosphere Holmes had maintained during his examination. "Mr. Holmes," Lestrade began, removing his hat with deliberate ceremony, "I received an anonymous message at Scotland Yard precisely 40 minutes ago reporting suspicious circumstances surrounding Dr. Adrian Valmont's death. Given your remarkable talent for appearing at crime scenes before they're officially reported, I assume this is no coincidence." Holmes gestured toward Professor Blackwood with languid grace. "The professor engaged my services this evening regarding his colleague's mysterious disappearance. We arrived to find the unfortunate truth only after gaining entry with Professor Blackwood's emergency key. As you can observe, Dr. Valmont appears to have died while working on his botanical research." Lestrade approached the body cautiously, his practiced eye taking in the peaceful arrangement. "Looks natural enough to me. These academic types work themselves into early graves regularly. No signs of struggle, no obvious wounds. Why the dramatic anonymous tip? I would caution against premature conclusions." Holmes interjected smoothly. "Dr. Watson has detected symptoms consistent with poisoning, and certain irregularities suggest a more sinister explanation than overwork." The inspector's expression hardened as he examined the hyacinth arrangement. "Irregularities?" The door was locked from inside, the window secured. "Unless you're suggesting suicide, Mr. Holmes, I fail to see how murder could have been accomplished in a sealed room." "Observe the reddish clay tracked across the carpet," Holmes replied, indicating the faint traces with his walking stick. "This distinctive soil differs markedly from common London mud. Someone entered this laboratory after Dr. Valmont's death, yet all conventional exits remain secured from within." Lestrade knelt reluctantly to examine the traces, his skepticism evident. "Could have been tracked in by the deceased himself. You're building elaborate theories on circumstantial evidence, Mr. Holmes." "Then explain these," Holmes countered, directing Hopkins to search the desk's lower drawer. The sergeant's investigation quickly revealed a collection of unsigned letters, their threatening tone unmistakable, even at a glance. "Warning Dr. Valmont to abandon his research or face dire consequences." The most recent arrived yesterday morning. Professor Blackwood stepped forward nervously. "Adrian never mentioned receiving threats. Our work was purely academic. Botanical cryptography has no apparent connection to criminal enterprises. Unless that cryptography leads to treasure worth killing for," Lestrade observed with growing interest. "These letters suggest someone took your research very seriously indeed, Professor. Combined with your access to this locked room, I find myself questioning your role in these events." Holmes interposed himself smoothly. Before suspicion falls upon Professor Blackwood, consider the foreign gentleman who visited Friday morning. Mrs. Partridge described him as swarthy, well-dressed, wearing distinctive green ring. The same individual likely returned that evening. She overheard two voices conversing in this laboratory. Lestrade's attention sharpened immediately. Foreign gentlemen with expensive tastes and secretive business. Now that sounds like a proper suspect. Hopkins, check the hotel registries and steamship manifests. If our man arrived recently, he'll have left a paper trail. While the police conducted their methodical search, Holmes drew me aside, speaking in tones too low for official ears. Watson, observe how efficiently our anonymous correspondent directed Scotland Yard to this precise location at this exact moment. The timing suggests intimate knowledge of our own investigation. Someone who knew we would discover the body and wished official attention focused here immediately. To what purpose? I whispered. To distract from activities occurring elsewhere, perhaps, or to ensure certain evidence receives official scrutiny while other clues remain overlooked. His grey eyes flickered meaningfully toward the Hyacinth arrangement, which Lestrade's men were now photographing. We must allow the police their conventional investigation while pursuing more subtle lines of inquiry. Lestrade returned, his expression troubled but determined. We've found additional correspondence suggesting Dr. Valmont was involved in authenticating historical documents of considerable value. If someone believed he possessed information leading to hidden treasure that provides motive enough for murder, I recommend posting guards at both entrances, Holmes suggested. The murderer may return to retrieve something overlooked during their initial visit. Already arranged, Lestrade replied. 2 constables will maintain watch throughout the night. Though between you and me, Mr. Holmes, I suspect our foreign gentleman is already aboard a Channel steamer, putting distance between himself and this unfortunate business. Holmes said nothing, but his expression suggested he harbored very different theories about our mysterious visitor's current whereabouts. As we prepared to depart, leaving Scotland Yard to their documentation, I noticed Holmes pause at the threshold, his keen gaze sweeping the laboratory on final time, as though committing every detail to memory. The game grows more complex by the moment, Watson, he murmured as we stepped into the fog-shrouded street. Our anonymous informant has ensured the police will pursue one line of investigation, while the true solution lies in an entirely different direction. The fog had thickened considerably during our return journey to Baker Street, transforming the familiar thoroughfares into a maze of spectral shadows and muffled echoes. Holmes maintained his characteristic silence throughout the cab ride, his sharp profile illuminated intermittently by passing street lamps as his mind worked through the complex web of evidence we had uncovered. I recognized the signs of intense mental activity, the slight drumming of his fingers against his knee, the occasional sharp intake of breath that indicated a new connection forming in that remarkable brain. Once settled in our comfortable sitting room, Holmes immediately spread Professor Blackwood's research portfolio across the table, positioning the 3 antique keys alongside the botanical sketches and cipher notes. The gaslight cast dancing shadows across the materials, lending an almost mystical quality to our examination. Holmes's methodical analysis. Watson, Holmes began, filling his pipe with deliberate precision, we must abandon the conventional assumption that we are dealing with a simple case of murder for gain. The evidence suggests something far more sophisticated, a conspiracy involving multiple parties, each possessing fragments of a larger puzzle. He lifted the crown key examining it under his magnifying lens with renewed intensity, observed the extraordinary craftsmanship of these engravings. This is not merely decorative work, but instructional. The crown key depicts Catherine de' Medici receiving a sealed document. The fleur-de-lis shows her conferring with a courier, and the hyacinth key illustrates her securing something within an ornate chest. A sequence of actions, I observed. Precisely. But more than that. These keys were designed to be used in a specific order, at specific locations. Catherine de' Medici was renowned for her elaborate security measures and her network of hidden repositories throughout Europe. These keys unlock not just physical containers, but a trail of evidence spanning centuries. Holmes set down his magnifying lens and fixed me with that penetrating stare that invariably preceded his most brilliant deductions. Consider the foreign gentleman's behavior, Watson. He arrives bearing these keys as a gift to Dr. Valmont, then returns for urgent consultation. Why provide someone with the means to unlock secrets if you intend to kill them immediately thereafter? Perhaps the keys were stolen and he sought to retrieve them, I suggested. No, the timing argues against theft. The gentleman was cooperative, even eager to share information. This suggests a partnership, not coercion. Dr. Valmont possessed the intellectual key, his ability to decode the cipher, while the foreign gentleman provided the physical keys necessary for implementation. Holmes began pacing with renewed energy, his mind clearly racing ahead through possibilities. But someone else knew about this collaboration, someone who feared what they might accomplish together. The murderer struck not to steal the treasure, but to prevent its discovery. New evidence emerges. As if summoned by Holmes's deductions, young Wiggins appeared at our door, his clothes damp with fog and his face bright with the excitement of successful reconnaissance. Holmes' network of street Arabs had once again proven invaluable. "Mr. Holmes," the boy reported breathlessly, "that foreign gent you described, I found him, sir. Been watching the British Museum all afternoon, he has. Went inside around 2 o'clock, spent hours in the manuscript room, looking at old books about French queens and such. Left in a right hurry when they started closing up, but not before copying down pages and pages of notes." Holmes tossed the boy a half-crown, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Excellent work, Wiggins. Did you observe which direction he took upon leaving?" "Headed toward Bloomsbury, sir, but walking careful-like, checking over his shoulder every few steps. Seemed right nervous about something." After Wiggins departed, Holmes turned to me with renewed purpose. "Our foreign gentleman seeks the same information we do, Watson, but from a different angle. He possesses the physical keys, but lacks the geographical knowledge to use them effectively. Dr. Valmont's cipher pointed to specific locations, but the stolen document from the laboratory contained the precise coordinates." "Then we must determine these locations ourselves," I said. "Indeed. And I know precisely the man to assist us." Holmes reached for his coat. "Sir Arthur Pennington of the Royal Geographical Society is London's foremost expert on historical cartography. If anyone can help us decode the geographical elements of Catherine's cipher, it is he." The expert consultation. Sir Arthur received us in his map-lined study with the enthusiasm of a scholar presented with an intriguing puzzle. His examination of our sketches and notes proved immediately fruitful. Botanical cryptography combined with geographical coordinates, he mused, spreading a large map of 16th century France across his desk. Fascinating methodology. The hyacinth was indeed Catherine de' Medici's personal symbol, and she maintained several private residences throughout the Loire Valley. Working with mathematical precision, Sir Arthur applied the spacing measurements from the flower arrangement to various locations associated with Catherine's court. The proportions correspond exactly to the triangulation between three significant sites: the Château de Chenonceau, the Chapel of Saint-Hubert, and the structure known as La Folie de la Reine, the Queen's Folly. A folly, Holmes inquired. A decorative garden structure often used for private meetings or concealment. This particular folly was destroyed during the Revolution, but historical records suggest it contained hidden chambers beneath its foundations. If your cipher points there, Mr. Holmes, it indicates something of great value was buried centuries ago, something requiring 3 distinct keys to access. The surveillance revelation. As we prepared to leave Sir Arthur's residence, Holmes suddenly drew me into the shadows of a doorway, his hand restraining my movement with firm pressure. "We are being observed, Watson," he whispered. "Note the figure across the street, partially concealed behind that lamppost. The stance is too still for a casual pedestrian, and the positioning allows clear sight lines to Sir Arthur's window." I peered through the fog and glimpsed a slight, cloaked figure who moved with a stealth that spoke of professional training. When the figure stepped briefly into the gaslight's glow, I caught a flash of green on a gloved hand. "The distinctive ring Mrs. Partridge described," I murmured. "Or someone wearing it," Holmes corrected softly. "Observe the gate, Watson. Too light for the heavy footsteps the housekeeper mentioned. Unless I am much mistaken, we are being watched by a woman, and her presence here suggests she has been following our investigation from the beginning." The figure hailed a passing hansom, and Holmes immediately signaled another cab. "The game grows more complex by the moment, Watson. We now have confirmation of at least 3 parties: the foreign gentleman seeking information at the British Museum, our mysterious female surveillance, and the murderer who killed Dr. Valmont. Each possesses pieces of the puzzle, yet none can proceed without risking exposure to the others. As our cab began following at a discreet distance through the fog-shrouded streets, Holmes' expression took on that familiar blend of anticipation and calculation. "We are about to discover, my dear fellow, which of these parties will make the first decisive move. The treasure of Catherine de' Medici has remained hidden for centuries, but tonight I suspect that long concealment is about to end." The chase led us through the labyrinthine streets of London, each turn bringing us closer to a confrontation that would determine not only the fate of the Medici treasure, but the resolution of Dr. Valmont's murder and the exposure of a conspiracy that reached back through the centuries to the court of the most dangerous queen in French history. Our pursuit through the fog-shrouded streets led us eastward from Bloomsbury, the mysterious woman's hansom maintaining a steady pace that spoke of both purpose and caution. Holmes leaned forward in our cab, his sharp profile illuminated intermittently by the passing gas lamps as his keen eyes tracked our quarry through the thickening murk. "She tests us," Holmes observed quietly, noting how the cab ahead took several unnecessary turns through narrow side streets. "This is not flight, Watson, but reconnaissance. She wishes to gauge our capabilities before committing to her next move. Observe how she never attempts to lose us entirely. We are meant to follow." The chase concluded at a respectable boarding house on Gower Street, where our cloaked figure dismissed her cab and entered with unhurried confidence. Holmes waited precisely 3 minutes before approaching the establishment, transforming his manner into that of a concerned relative seeking information about a lodger. The landlady, Mrs. Griswold, proved remarkably forthcoming under Holmes's gentle questioning. "Oh yes, Miss Delacroix arrived from Paris 5 days ago. Very refined young woman. Spends most days at the British Museum conducting research. Pays promptly and causes no trouble whatsoever. Delacroix, I whispered, once we had retreated to observe from across the street. The same surname as the Sorbonne professor in Dr. Valmont's correspondence. Holmes nodded grimly. Daughter or niece, possessing both the family's scientific knowledge and a personal stake in our investigation. Her surveillance of Sir Arthur's residence confirms she understands the geographical elements of the cipher. But the crucial question remains: does she work independently or in concert with our foreign gentlemen? Holmes's strategic gambit. Rather than continue passive observation, Holmes led us to a small coffee house with clear sight lines to the boarding house entrance. Once settled with strong coffee, he outlined his strategy with characteristic precision. We have reached the point, Watson, where further surveillance yields diminishing returns. 3 separate parties circle this cipher like predators around prey. If we permit events to proceed unchecked, the result will be chaos, and quite possibly additional murders. He withdrew his notebook, sketching a rough diagram of the various players. Consider our cast. Miss Delacroix, conducting research and surveillance with professional skill. The foreign gentleman with his distinctive ring, possessing the physical keys but lacking geographical knowledge. The unknown murderer who killed Dr. Valmont, stole the cipher document, yet arranged for Scotland Yard's involvement through anonymous correspondence. You believe they are separate parties? I asked. I am convinced of it. Their actions reveal different objectives and methods. Miss Delacroix seeks information through research and observation. The foreign gentleman attempts direct negotiation and partnership. The murderer employs violence, but then seeks official investigation. A contradiction that suggests complex motivations. Holmes' eyes gleamed with the familiar light of intellectual challenge. Therefore, we shall force them to reveal themselves by offering something none can resist: the appearance of decisive progress toward Catherine de' Medici's treasure. The elaborate deception. Holmes summoned Professor Blackwood to Baker Street the following morning, finding the scholar increasingly haggard from sleepless nights and mounting anxiety. Holmes explained only what was necessary for his cooperation. You wish me to pretend departure for France? Blackwood asked nervously. Accompanied by Dr. Watson, Holmes confirmed. Your movements will be entirely genuine. Tickets, luggage, public departure by the Dover train. However, you will carry a specially prepared portfolio containing false coordinates and deliberately misleading cipher translations. To what purpose? To flush our adversaries into the open. Each party believes they require your expertise to locate Catherine's repository. When they learn of your intended departure, they must act either to prevent your journey or to follow and steal your discoveries. Holmes disappeared into his bedroom, emerging as a stooped, sandy-whiskered commercial traveler whose entire demeanor had been transformed. Even I, accustomed to his remarkable disguises, required a second glance to recognize him. I shall travel separately, he explained in a nasal Midlands accent, observing our observers while you and the professor play your roles as unwitting scholars, pursuing academic glory. The convergence. By afternoon, we were aboard the Dover train, Professor Blackwood and I occupying a first-class compartment while discussing our fabricated expedition in suitably guarded tones. Holmes, in his commercial traveler disguise, circulated through the carriages with samples of cheap watches, his keen eyes cataloguing every passenger, Within minutes of departure, I spotted our first shadow, Miss Delacroix, seated near the rear of our carriage, her face partially concealed by a traveling veil, but the distinctive green ring clearly visible when she adjusted her gloves. "Our friend from Gower Street," I murmured to Professor Blackwood, who glanced nervously toward the rear. Holmes appeared at our compartment door moments later, sliding it open just enough to whisper urgently, "Not alone." The foreign gentleman boarded at the last moment, third carriage forward, travelling under the name Monsieur Beaumont. "But there is a third party, Watson. A gentleman I do not recognize, middle-aged, impeccably dressed, who has been watching both our other shadows with professional interest." "The murderer?" I asked quietly. "Possibly, or another player in this increasingly complex game. He carries himself like a military man but dresses like a diplomat. Most intriguingly, he seems to recognize both Miss Delacroix and our Monsieur Beaumont, though they show no awareness of his presence." The revelation of stakes. As the train thundered through the Kent countryside toward Dover, Holmes continued his circulation, gathering intelligence with remarkable efficiency. When he returned to our compartment near journey's end, his expression was grim. "Our mysterious third party is Colonel Sir Reginald Ashworth, recently returned from diplomatic service in Paris. I overheard him speaking with a companion about preventing an international incident and protecting British interests. It appears our cipher research has attracted official attention at the highest levels." Professor Blackwood paled visibly. "Government involvement, but our work was purely academic. Botanical cryptography has no military applications." "Unless," Holmes replied quietly, "Catherine de' Medici's correspondence contains information that could embarrass current diplomatic relations between Britain and France. Historical secrets sometimes cast long shadows. Professor, your innocent research may have uncovered state secrets that powerful men prefer to keep buried." The train began its approach to Dover, and through the window we could see the harbor, with its forest of masts and the Channel ferries preparing for evening departures. Holmes checked his watch with characteristic precision. "The game enters its final phase, gentlemen. Our adversaries must now choose between allowing us to reach France or revealing themselves through direct action. Either choice will provide the answers we seek." As we prepared to disembark, I noticed increased activity among our shadows. Miss Delacroix had moved forward in the carriage. Monsieur Beaumont was gathering his belongings with obvious haste, and Colonel Ashworth was engaged in urgent conversation with two men who had the unmistakable bearing of government agents. "Holmes," I whispered, "I fear we have set forces in motion that may prove beyond our control." His smile was sharp and cold, as winter steel. "On the contrary, Watson, we have simply illuminated the true stakes of our game. Now we shall discover which of our players is prepared to commit murder to protect their interests, and whether they realize they have been dancing to our tune from the very beginning." The train shuddered to a halt at Dover Station, and the final act of our deadly drama prepared to unfold beneath the gathering dusk of the Channel coast. The Dover platform buzzed with evening activity as passengers disembarked from our train, their voices mixing with the calls of porters and the rhythmic chuffing of locomotives. The salt-tinged air carried an undercurrent of tension that seemed to affect more than just our small party. Holmes, maintaining his commercial traveler disguise, moved through the crowd with practiced invisibility, while Professor Blackwood and I played our roles as anxious academics preparing for the Channel crossing. The convergence of adversaries. Within minutes of our arrival, the careful choreography of surveillance became apparent to Holmes's trained eye. Miss Delacroix had positioned herself near the ferry booking office, her attention divided between studying timetables and observing our movements. Monsieur Beaumont stood in conversation with a customs official, though his frequent glances toward Professor Blackwood betrayed his true focus. Most significantly, Colonel Ashworth and his two companions had taken strategic positions that effectively controlled the main approaches to the departure gates. "We have achieved the desired effect," Holmes murmured as the press of travelers brought us momentarily together. "Each party now recognizes the others as competitors. The question remains which will act first and how decisively." Before anyone could respond, a commotion erupted near the ticket windows. A well-dressed gentleman had collapsed against a luggage cart, his face contorted in unmistakable agony. The crowd pressed closer as his body convulsed, and I immediately recognized the symptoms that had become tragically familiar. "Stand back," Holmes commanded, abandoning his disguise as he knelt beside the victim. "Dr. Watson, your assessment." My examination confirmed our worst fears. "The same poison that killed Dr. Valmont," I reported grimly. "Vascular toxin, fast-acting. He has perhaps minutes." The dying man's eyes focused briefly on Holmes, his lips moving in desperate effort to communicate. Holmes leaned closer, and I heard the faint whisper, "Not France, London, Clerkenwell, Chapel." His hand clutched a crumpled telegram, which Holmes deftly palmed before the local constabulary arrived. The London revelation. Once we had provided statements to the Dover police and retreated to a quiet corner of the station hotel, Holmes spread the deceased man's possessions across our table with the satisfaction of a chess master arranging his pieces. "Our victim was no casual traveler," Holmes announced, examining a collection of documents. "Observe the quality tailoring, the ink stains suggesting archival work, and most significantly, this telegram received only hours ago." The message appeared to be random letters, but Holmes applied the Hyacinth Cipher principles with swift calculation. His expression grew increasingly grave as the meaning emerged. "Repository located, French Trail deliberate misdirection. True location St. James Chapel, Clerkenwell. Midnight meeting essential. Bring all keys." He read aloud. Professor Blackwood stared in amazement. "Clerkenwell? But that's medieval London, predating Catherine de' Medici by centuries." "Precisely why it makes perfect sense," Holmes replied. "Catherine was renowned for her elaborate deceptions and unexpected hiding places. A forgotten London chapel, abandoned after the Reformation, would provide ideal concealment. The building's crypt was sealed in 1572, the same year as the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, when Catherine's political machinations reached their zenith. The implications struck me immediately. Then our entire journey to France was orchestrated misdirection. Someone has been leading us away from London while they prepared to claim the treasure themselves." Indeed, and our various adversaries have just learned the same truth, which explains the sudden violence. Someone decided eliminating competition was preferable to sharing the discovery. The government interest. As if summoned by our discussion, Colonel Ashworth appeared at our table, his military bearing unmistakable despite his civilian attire. His approach was direct but cautious, suggesting a man accustomed to delicate negotiations. "Mr. Holmes," he began quietly, "I believe circumstances require candid discussion. I represent certain government interests, and I must inform you that your investigation has attracted attention at the highest levels." Holmes regarded him with cool interest. "Since when does botanical research threaten national security, Colonel?" Ashworth's expression remained grave. when that research threatens to expose correspondence that could destabilize current diplomatic relations with France. Catherine de' Medici's papers include material that certain parties would prefer remain buried permanently. You fear historical embarrassment more than justice for Dr. Valmont's murder, I interjected. I fear international incidents that could cost lives in the present day, Ashworth replied firmly. Whatever treasure you seek, Mr. Holmes, the political ramifications far outweigh any academic or monetary value. Holmes studied the colonel with renewed interest. Your concern suggests intimate knowledge of the document's contents, perhaps more intimate than a government observer should possess. The strategic return. Holmes rose abruptly, his decision clearly made. Gentlemen, we return to London immediately. The midnight meeting at St. James's Chapel provides our murderer with the perfect opportunity, isolated location, darkness, and the convergence of all remaining parties. But they have made one crucial error. Which is? Professor Blackwood asked nervously. They assume we remain ignorant of tonight's developments. Instead, we shall be waiting. Holmes's eyes gleamed with anticipation. The 3 keys remain in our possession, and without them, no repository can be opened. Our adversaries must either negotiate or attempt theft, and either choice will reveal their true intentions. As we prepared for the return journey to London, Holmes outlined his strategy with characteristic precision. We would reach Clerkenwell well before midnight, positioning ourselves to observe rather than participate directly. The ancient chapel would become the stage for our final confrontation, where centuries-old secrets would finally yield their truth. Tonight, Holmes said quietly as our train pulled away from Dover, we shall discover whether Catherine de' Medici's legacy demands further sacrifice or whether reason and justice can prevail over greed and political expediency. The fog had begun to lift, revealing stars that seemed to promise clarity after long confusion. But I knew that before dawn we would face dangers that would test both our courage and Holmes's remarkable intellect to their uttermost limits. The game was approaching its deadly climax, and the ancient stones of Clerkenwell would soon witness the resolution of a mystery that had claimed 2 lives and threatened to claim more. Our return journey to London proceeded with the urgency that midnight deadlines demand, yet Holmes maintained his characteristic composure throughout the rattling train ride from Dover. The revelation that our true destination lay not in France, but in the ancient stones of Clerkenwell had transformed our entire understanding of the case, and I could see in Holmes's sharp profile the intense mental activity that preceded his most brilliant deductions. The strategic return. Rather than proceeding directly to St. James's Chapel, Holmes insisted we return briefly to Baker Street, where he gathered specific tools from his extensive collection, a dark lantern, several lengths of rope, and his most reliable lock-picking instruments. Professor Blackwood was dispatched to remain safely at our lodgings under Mrs. Hudson's watchful eye, despite his scholarly protests. Tonight requires skills beyond academic expertise, Holmes declared firmly, handing the professor a sealed envelope. Should we fail to return by dawn, deliver this to Inspector Lestrade. It contains everything Scotland Yard requires to pursue the case independently. Colonel Ashworth accompanied us with obvious reluctance, his military bearing unable to conceal a growing nervousness that struck me as increasingly suspicious. His 2 companions followed at a discreet distance, their positioning suggesting surveillance rather than protection. The ancient sanctuary. By 11:30, Holmes and I had positioned ourselves within the ruins of St. James's Chapel, a forgotten medieval structure whose Gothic arches stood skeletal against the fog-shrouded London sky. The building had been partially demolished during the Reformation, its nave open to the elements, while the crypt inside the chapels remained intact beneath accumulated centuries of debris and neglect. Holmes selected our vantage point with characteristic foresight, a partially collapsed gallery that provided clear sight lines to both the main entrance and the crypt stairs, while keeping us concealed in shadow. The ancient stones seemed to absorb sound, creating an atmosphere of profound silence broken only by distant church bells, marking the approach of midnight. "Observe the crypt entrance," Holmes whispered, indicating fresh disturbances in the accumulated dust. "Someone has prepared the site, clearing access to whatever lies below. Note also how the altar stone shows signs of recent examination. Scratches around the edges where someone has tested for hidden mechanisms." The midnight convergence. As the clock struck 12, our vigil was rewarded by the arrival of our first visitor. Miss Delacroix entered through the main doors, moving with confident familiarity that suggested previous reconnaissance. She carried a leather satchel and wore practical clothing more suited to archaeological exploration than feminine fashion, but her movements betrayed professional training as she examined the altar area with systematic thoroughness. Within moments, Monsieur Beaumont appeared from the opposite direction, his distinctive ring catching faint moonlight filtering through broken windows. His approach was more cautious, pausing frequently to ensure he remained unobserved. When he spotted Miss Delacroix, his reaction was immediate recognition rather than surprise. "Mademoiselle Delacroix," he called softly in French, "your father would be disappointed to find you pursuing this dangerous course alone." "My father is dead because of this cursed cipher," she replied, bitterly, her voice carrying clearly in the chapel's acoustics. "Henri Delacroix was murdered for refusing to reveal his research to those who would exploit it for personal gain. I will not allow his killers to profit from his death." The revelation struck with devastating clarity. Our foreign gentleman was not the Sorbonne professor himself, but someone connected to him, while Miss Delacroix sought vengeance rather than treasure. The dynamics of our case had shifted fundamentally. The government intervention. Before their conversation could continue, Colonel Ashworth emerged from the shadows near the vestry, flanked by his two companions. His appearance transformed the gathering into a tense confrontation, each party suddenly aware they had walked into a carefully orchestrated trap. "I cannot permit this excavation to proceed," Ashworth announced with quiet authority, but I detected a tremor in his voice that suggested personal stakes beyond official duty. "The documents you seek contain information that threatens current diplomatic negotiations. As a representative of Her Majesty's government, I must insist you abandon this enterprise immediately." "How convenient!" Holmes's voice rang out from our concealed position, causing all three figures below to freeze in surprise. That government interests aligned so perfectly with personal greed. The murderer revealed. We descended from the gallery, my revolver trained on the startled assembly, while Holmes approached with measured confidence. His next words fell like hammer blows upon the ancient stones. "Colonel Ashworth, or should I say the man who murdered both Henri Delacroix in Paris and Dr. Adrian Valmont in London. Your diplomatic credentials provided the perfect cover for international movement, while your military training supplied the necessary skills for subtle assassination." Ashworth's composure cracked momentarily before reasserting itself. Preposterous accusations, Mr. Holmes. I represent legitimate government interests in preventing an international incident. You represent only yourself, Holmes countered, with cold precision. Your mistake was the reddish clay tracked through Dr. Valmont's laboratory, distinctive soil from the Chiltern Hills, where your country estate is located. That same clay appeared on your boots when we observed you at Dover Station, and I noticed the traces of it here tonight when you entered ahead of us. Holmes produced the 3 antique keys, their metal surfaces catching the moonlight streaming through the broken windows. You murdered Delacroix when he refused to share his cipher breakthrough, then killed Valmont when he independently solved the puzzle. But you lacked these physical keys, forcing you to follow others who possessed them while systematically eliminating competition. Miss Delacroix's face had gone white with fury. You killed my father for money. He trusted you when you claimed to be conducting an official government investigation into stolen French archives. Henry was a fool, Ashworth replied, his mask finally dropping to reveal cold calculation beneath. Also are you all. Those keys open more than treasure. They provide access to financial networks established by Catherine de' Medici that remain active today, their modern value incalculable. The final confrontation. Ashworth's hand moved toward his coat with surprising speed, producing not a weapon but a small glass vial containing clear liquid. The same poison that proved so effective twice before. Unless you wish to join Delacroix and Valmont in death, you will surrender those keys and allow me to depart with the dignity befitting a gentleman. The standoff hung suspended in the fog-shrouded ruins, each party calculating odds and consequences. Holmes's expression remained unreadable, but I recognized the subtle tension in his posture that preceded decisive action. Your theatrical gesture fails to account for one crucial detail, Colonel, Holmes said quietly. I anticipated precisely this scenario and took appropriate precautions. On cue, Inspector Lestrade and a half-dozen constables emerged from concealment throughout the chapel ruins, their presence transforming Ashworth's threat into empty bravado. The colonel's shoulders sagged in recognition of defeat, the vial slipping from his fingers to shatter harmlessly on ancient stone. The repository revealed. Reginald Ashworth, Lestrade announced formally, I arrest you for the murders of Henri Delacroix and Dr. Adrian Valmont, and for conspiracy to commit theft of historical artifacts. As the constables secured their prisoner, Holmes turned to address the altar, where centuries of accumulated debris had concealed the true purpose of our gathering. With steady hands, he began clearing away loose stones and mortar, revealing intricate carvings that had been hidden beneath. Monsieur Beaumont, Holmes said, glancing toward the foreign gentleman, or should I say, Inspector Reynaud of the Paris Sûreté, your investigation of Colonel Ashworth's activities has provided valuable corroboration of our deductions. Reynaud removed his distinctive ring, revealing his true identity with a slight bow. I have been tracking the colonel's movements for months, Mr. Holmes. Your brilliant deduction has provided the evidence necessary for prosecution in both countries. Holmes inserted the 3 keys into concealed slots beneath the altar stone. Hyacinth, fleur-de-lis, crown, in the precise order indicated by their engravings. A deep grinding sound echoed from beneath the floor as centuries-old mechanisms engaged for the first time since the Elizabethan era. The massive stone slab slowly receded, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The final chapter awaits below, Holmes announced, taking a lantern from Lestrade. Whatever Catherine de' Medici concealed here has cost 3 lives and nearly caused an international incident. Let us discover whether her secrets were worth such a terrible price. The ancient stairway beckoned downward into mystery, promising revelations that would finally resolve the deadly puzzle of the Hyacinth Cipher. The stone stairway descended in a tight spiral, each worn step testimony to centuries of careful concealment. Holmes led our procession, with the dark lantern held low, its amber circle revealing carved symbols along the walls, hyacinths, lilies, and crowns, repeating in patterns that confirmed we followed Catherine de' Medici's personal iconography to its ultimate destination. Behind me, Inspector Reynaud moved with the quiet confidence of a man whose long investigation was finally approaching resolution, while Miss Delacroix's presence added poignant weight to our descent into history's hidden depths. The ancient repository. After perhaps 30 feet, we emerged into a vaulted chamber whose dimensions suggested it predated the medieval chapel above by centuries. The air was surprisingly dry, preserved by architectural ingenuity that had protected this space from London's notorious dampness. Around the chamber's perimeter stood wooden cabinets of obvious antiquity, their surfaces decorated with the familiar hyacinth motifs, while iron-bound coffers rested on stone pedestals arranged in a careful pattern. "Extraordinary craftsmanship," Holmes murmured, examining the nearest cabinet with his magnifying lens. "French workmanship, transported piece by piece and assembled here at Catherine's direction. To conceal such a repository in the heart of Protestant London required both audacity and exquisite planning. The central feature of the chamber was an ornate casket of Italian design, its surface inlaid with mother-of-pearl hyacinths that seemed to glow in our lantern light. Holmes approached it with the reverence due not to monetary treasure, but to the intellectual triumph it represented. The cipher's ultimate secret. Working with surgical precision, Holmes applied the three keys in their predetermined sequence: hyacinth, fleur-de-lis, crown. The ancient mechanism responded with a series of soft clicks, followed by the faint sigh of displaced air as the heavy lid slowly rose. Within lay not gold or jewels in the conventional sense, but carefully preserved documents, wrapped in oiled leather, their vellum pages protected across the centuries. Holmes selected one bundle, unfolding it with infinite care. His grey eyes scanned the faded ink, translating the archaic French with practiced ease. "Here lies the true heart of our mystery, Watson. Catherine de' Medici's private cipher journal, her complete key to interpreting the botanical codes she scattered through artwork and correspondence across Europe. But surely that alone could not justify murder," Lestrade observed, though his tone suggested he suspected otherwise. Holmes withdrew additional documents, his expression growing increasingly grave. "These are not merely historical curiosities, Inspector. Observe detailed financial records of a covert banking network established by the Medici family. Accounts that have remained dormant but active through centuries, accumulating interest and influence long after the original depositors turned to dust." Miss Delacroix stepped forward, her voice trembling with controlled emotion. "My father suspected something of this nature. He believed Catherine had created what he called a shadow treasury, financial arrangements designed to ensure her family's power could survive any political upheaval. That is why Colonel Ashworth murdered him." The conspiracy revealed. Inspector Reynaud examined the documents with professional gravity, his trained eye recognizing their implications immediately. "These papers represent authorization codes for accessing accounts that still exist within European banking systems. Through his diplomatic work, Ashworth discovered their existence and realized that anyone possessing these documents could claim fortunes worth millions of pounds. Holmes carefully replaced each document as he examined it, his movements reflecting both scholarly respect and practical caution. Catherine's genius lay not in hiding treasure, but in creating a system that would generate wealth continuously across generations. These accounts have been compounding interest for 3 centuries, controlled by a network of designated successors who maintained absolute secrecy. Then Ashworth killed for more than historical artifacts, I observed. He sought control of a financial empire. Precisely, Watson. But his fatal error was underestimating the complexity of Catherine's system. Even with the physical keys, he lacked the cryptographic knowledge necessary to access the accounts. He needed either Professor Blackwood's expertise or the stolen cipher document, but his murders had attracted too much attention to proceed safely. Justice and resolution. As we prepared to ascend from the hidden chamber, Miss Delacroix posed the question that troubled us all. What becomes of these accounts? Surely the families who built fortunes on Catherine's foundation cannot simply be dispossessed. Yet the system itself represents centuries of financial manipulation. Holmes paused on the ancient stairway, his expression thoughtful. That decision rests with governments and courts, not with consulting detectives. Our role was to uncover truth and prevent further murder. How society chooses to address historical injustice lies beyond my purview. The documents themselves present a different challenge, Reynaud added. They belong to history, but their power belongs to no one. France will insist these papers be preserved for scholarly study, but under conditions that prevent their misuse. Holmes nodded approvingly. A wise approach, Inspector. Joint custody between the British and French governments, accessible only for historical research, with the accounts themselves permanently frozen. The knowledge preserved, the temptation eliminated. The dawn of resolution. We emerged from St. James's Chapel as dawn broke over London, the morning light burning away the fog that had shrouded our investigation from its beginning. Colonel Ashworth sat in a police wagon, his aristocratic bearing finally broken by the weight of his crimes and the collapse of his grandiose schemes. The ancient keys that had unlocked Catherine de' Medici's secrets were secured as evidence, their deadly allure finally neutralized by official custody. Professor Blackwood awaited us at the chapel entrance, his relief at our safe return evident despite his exhaustion. Holmes provided him with a careful summary of our discoveries, omitting the more sensitive financial details that would emerge during the inevitable legal proceedings. Your colleague, Dr. Valmont, died pursuing knowledge, Holmes told the professor gently. His cipher work proved brilliant enough to unlock secrets that had remained hidden for centuries. That achievement deserves recognition, even though the consequences proved tragic. Miss Delacroix approached Holmes as we prepared to depart, her eyes still red from grief but showing determination beneath the sorrow. Mr. Holmes, I came to London seeking vengeance for my father's murder. You have given me justice instead, which proves far more satisfying. Thank you. Philosophical reflection. Back at Baker Street, with Mrs. Hudson's welcome breakfast warming our sitting room and the familiar sounds of London awakening beyond our windows, Holmes settled into his chair, with that characteristic blend of satisfaction and melancholy that followed his most complex cases. A most instructive affair, Watson, he remarked, filling his pipe with deliberate precision. It demonstrates how the past never truly dies, but continues to influence the present in unexpected ways. Catherine de' Medici's intelligence network may have begun 4 centuries ago, but its consequences rippled forward to claim lives in Victorian London. And the Hyacinth Cipher itself? I inquired. Holmes smiled faintly, the sharpness of recent exertion softening into contemplative detachment. Will be studied by scholars for generations, providing insights into Renaissance cryptography and political intrigue. But its deadliest secret, the financial network it protected, has been neutralized. Colonel Ashworth will face justice for his crimes, and the accounts he sought to control will be examined by proper authorities. He rose to examine the morning papers, already carrying breathless hints of a curious discovery in Clerkenwell. The case is closed, Watson, but it reminds us that human folly remains the constant in every equation, whether embodied in a Florentine queen, a French scholar, or a British colonel. The desire to control what others do not understand proves eternally dangerous. Our small contribution lies only in illuminating such darkness where we may. As the familiar rhythms of Baker Street resumed around us, the clatter of carriages, the cry of street vendors, the comfortable domestic bustle that marked the end of another adventure, I reflected that the case of the Hyacinth Cipher would take its place among Holmes's most remarkable achievements, a mystery where botanical knowledge, historical research, and brilliant deduction combined to solve murders spanning 2 nations and expose secrets buried for 3 centuries, had finally yielded its deadly truth. And justice, though delayed, had ultimately prevailed. The great game continued, and somewhere in London's vast labyrinth, another mystery was already waiting to test the remarkable mind of Sherlock Holmes. 3 days after our dramatic confrontation beneath St. James's Chapel, Holmes finally consented to discuss the finer details of the Hyacinth Cipher case. The November fog had returned with characteristic persistence, pressing against our Baker Street windows and creating that familiar atmosphere of isolation that seemed to sharpen Holmes's analytical faculties. I found him before the fireplace, violin bow poised thoughtfully as he contemplated the dancing flames. Holmes's methodical explanations. The case hinged upon understanding Catherine de' Medici's genius for misdirection, Watson. Holmes began setting aside his instrument. Colonel Ashworth's fatal error was assuming the cipher was linguistic rather than geometric. The 3 hyacinths formed a precise skull and triangle. When overlaid upon medieval London's map, with the white bloom anchored at the Tower and the purple at Westminster, the 3rd point indicated Clerkenwell exactly. I consulted my notes, seeking clarity on remaining puzzles. But how did you identify Ashworth so definitively? Surely the Chiltern clay alone was insufficient evidence. The clay provided physical corroboration of psychological certainty. Holmes replied with satisfaction. Consider the crime's requirements: intimate knowledge of French diplomatic history, position in English society above suspicion, and botanical expertise for the aconite extraction. Ashworth possessed all 3 qualifications, plus the crucial error of limestone dust on his boots from shadowing Miss Delacroix at the British Museum. Holmes moved to examine the cipher sketches spread across our table. The mysterious HP in Valmont's diary stood for High Patron. Ashworth had initially funded the research under governmental pretense, then murdered to prevent exposure when the results proved too valuable to share. Political ramifications and justice. The immediate aftermath proved as complex as the investigation itself. Inspector Lestrade arrived that afternoon, his expression betraying frustration with diplomatic interference. The Foreign Office suggests Ashworth's status complicates prosecution, Mr. Holmes. They prefer quiet resolution over public embarrassment. Then we must ensure sufficient evidence becomes public knowledge that suppression proves impossible. Holmes declared with cold determination. Inspector Reynaud's simultaneous arrival confirmed French pressure for extradition, while Miss Delacroix provided her father's sealed testimony, documenting Ashworth's threats and false representations. Holmes orchestrated a coordinated response: French diplomatic pressure, academic publication of Valmont's research through Professor Blackwood, and strategic newspaper disclosure created irresistible momentum toward proper prosecution. Within a week, official word arrived that Ashworth would face a trial in both jurisdictions. His diplomatic immunity formally waived. Character resolutions and reflections. The months that followed brought news of our various participants' fates. Miss Delacroix accepted a research position at the Bibliothèque Nationale, cataloging Catherine de' Medici's political correspondence under scholarly supervision. Professor Blackwood published his botanical cryptography work through the Royal Institute, carefully expurgated, but advancing the field considerably. Inspector Reynaud returned to Paris with the satisfaction of justice achieved across international boundaries. Each found their proper resolution. Holmes observed one evening, as we discussed the case's conclusion. Miss Delacroix sought vengeance but accepted justice, evidence that reason sometimes triumphs over passion. Blackwood learned to distinguish between knowledge and its dangerous applications. The deeper implications. As winter settled over London, Holmes reflected on the case's broader significance. Catherine de' Medici's true legacy was not hidden treasure, Watson, but the demonstration that power conceals itself through complexity. Her cipher survived 3 centuries because it required both intellectual brilliance and moral restraint to unlock safely. I ventured to ask whether he regretted surrendering such potentially valuable secrets to government custody. Holmes smiled with characteristic detachment. Power as abstraction interests me no more than money as mere accumulation. The pattern fascinates. Motive, opportunity, means, once sufficiently understood to prevent further crime, the rest bores me. The return to routine. The familiar rhythms of Baker Street gradually resumed around us. New cases arrived: an enigmatic telegram from Vienna, jewel theft in Belgravia, mysterious footprints discovered near Hyde Park. Holmes accepted each with the same intellectual appetite that had first drawn me into his orbit years before. The board is cleared. The pieces returned to their box, he said softly, lifting his violin once more. We spend our lives seeking keys to unlock hidden treasures, only to discover that the true burden lies in keeping secrets responsibly rather than merely possessing them. The fire crackled warmly as Holmes' music filled the room, driving back both the pressing fog and the lingering shadows of Clerkenwell. The case of the Hyacinth Cipher had taken its place among his most remarkable achievements, a mystery where botanical knowledge, historical research, and brilliant deduction combined to solve murders spanning centuries and expose the eternal dangers of unchecked ambition. The great game continued, and somewhere in London's vast complexity, another puzzle already awaited the remarkable mind of Sherlock Holmes. The January snows had transformed Baker Street into a crystalline wonderland, muffling the familiar sounds of London traffic and creating an atmosphere of profound tranquility within our sitting room. Holmes sat before the fire, examining a collection of tobacco samples through his magnifying lens, while I organized the final documents related to our most perplexing case. The comfortable domestic routine felt particularly precious after the deadly intrigues we had recently unraveled. Mrs. Hudson entered with the afternoon post, her footsteps unusually quiet on the carpeted floor. Holmes glanced up expectantly, his keen eyes immediately focusing on a letter bearing distinctive Parisian postmarks and official seals. News from Inspector Raynaud, Holmes announced, slitting the envelope with characteristic precision. His expression brightened as he scanned the closely written pages. Colonel Ashworth has been convicted in French courts for Henri Delacroix's murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. The British proceedings concluded similarly last week. Justice has been served on both sides of the Channel. I felt a profound sense of relief at this news. And the other participants? Miss Delacroix has accepted a permanent research position at the Bibliothèque Nationale, cataloging Renaissance cryptographic materials under scholarly supervision. Her father's name has been formally cleared, and she writes that she has found peace in continuing his academic legacy rather than pursuing vengeance. Holmes withdrew a second letter from the envelope. Professor Blackwood's botanical cryptography paper has been published by Cambridge University Press to considerable acclaim. Dr. Valmont receives full posthumous credit as co-discoverer, ensuring his intellectual contributions will be remembered appropriately. The professor has established a research fund in Valmont's name to support future scholars in the field. Setting aside the correspondence, Holmes moved to examine the 3 replica keys that Inspector Raynaud had sent as a gesture of friendship, perfect reproductions of the originals now secured in joint British-French custody. He balanced them thoughtfully in his palm, their metal surfaces catching the firelight. Curious how objects transform meaning based on context, Holmes observed. Once these represented deadly secrets worth killing for, now they serve as paperweights and reminders that human ambition often exceeds human wisdom. I joined him before the fire, appreciating the comfortable warmth after our recent adventures in fog-shrouded chapels and ancient crypts. Do you believe we have truly neutralized the threat they represented? As thoroughly as possible without destroying historical knowledge entirely, Holmes replied. The Medici financial networks have been permanently frozen, their secrets preserved for scholarly study, but stripped of practical power. Catherine de' Medici's shadow treasury will trouble no one again, though her cryptographic genius continues inspiring academic research. Holmes returned the keys to the mantelpiece, where they rested beside his pipe rack and the morocco case containing his medals, honors he rarely acknowledged, but somehow never discarded. The case demonstrated something fundamental about human nature, Watson. Secrets maintain power only through complexity and the willingness of others to kill for them. Remove the deadly ambition, and even the most elaborate cipher becomes merely an intellectual curiosity. Yet, 3 men died pursuing those secrets, I observed sadly. 2 died pursuing knowledge, while 1 died attempting to steal it. Holmes corrected gently. Dr. Valmont and Henri Delacroix represented the finest aspects of human curiosity, brilliant minds seeking to unlock historical mysteries for the advancement of understanding. Colonel Ashworth embodied the opposite impulse, intelligence corrupted by greed and willing to destroy rather than create. The afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across our familiar room. Holmes settled into his chair with evident satisfaction, reaching for his violin with the contentment of a man whose intellectual appetite had been thoroughly satisfied. "You may record this case among your chronicles, Watson," he said, tuning the strings with practiced precision. Future readers might find instruction in how the past continuously influences the present, and how careful observation can illuminate even the most carefully concealed truths. As Holmes began playing a haunting melody that seemed to capture both the mystery's complexity and its ultimate resolution, I reflected on the extraordinary events we had witnessed. The case of the Hyacinth Cipher had combined botanical science, Renaissance history, and modern detection into a narrative demonstrating both human brilliance and human folly. Justice had prevailed, scholarship had advanced, and dangerous secrets had been neutralized through the application of reason and unwavering commitment to truth. The fire settled into glowing embers as Holmes's music filled the room, driving back the winter darkness and the lingering shadows of our recent adventure. Tomorrow would doubtless bring new mysteries, fresh puzzles to challenge that remarkable mind. But for this peaceful evening, the great detective was content to reflect on a case successfully concluded and justice properly served. The fog had finally lifted from London's streets, and the mystery of the Hyacinth Cipher had yielded all its deadly secrets to the brilliant deductive powers of Mr. Sherlock Holmes.